Today we are talking about adventure and romance. And when I was a child, my first love of computer games began with King's Quest 1 and 2. Two games published by Roberta Williams and Sierra Online. In those games, you'd start off going on an adventure to find treasures to bring them back to the king. And the reward for this was that the king would make his final wish in life to give you the crown of Daventry and make you king. And then, in the second game, Romancing the Throne, your mission was to find true love, to go face all sorts of adversities and rescue a beautiful princess from a tower and, of course, live happily ever after. Simple stories, perhaps in no way unusual, the normal fare of fantasy tales. Today we're talking about adventure and romance. When I was a child, I fell in love with King's Quest 1 and 2. The first game was about finding treasure and going on an adventure and bringing that treasure back to the king. And the king would ultimately, on his deathbed, make you king. And then you would inherit the crown of the kingdom of Daventry. In the second game, you set off to go rescue a princess from a tower in a faraway land, and then, of course, spend your life with her happily ever after. And at that time in my childhood, I was rather sheltered, I guess. So I didn't have a lot of familiarity with many fairy tales and stories. Those games were my first introduction to fantasy. And they captured my sense of wonder. They captured my sense of understanding what life was supposed to be about. And that understanding continued to follow me throughout the rest of my life. No matter how far away I went from those values, I always continued to know and remember them. That was my true north. And then life happened. And I realized that the message that we're made to believe about what makes life worth living isn't that message at all. So instead of thinking that life is about going on an adventure with this sense of what's next, what's around the next bend, what's today going to bring, instead of believing that love is about finding this wonderful experience of fairy tale romance. We're told to be grounded, to be mature and responsible, and to let go of those childish things. Because after all, everyone knows that's just fairy tale stories. That's not real. But that's a big lie, because it is real. But it took me a lot of years of living as an adult before I realized this. People tell you that those things are fake. They tell you that because they want you to settle for that relationship that's a little bit toxic and abusive, a little bit cruel and manipulative, a little bit far from that romantic vision of true love that maybe you once thought you knew. We're asked to give up a sense of adventure in life and trade it in for the daily grind of working for some boss so that you can do what they want you to do, or grinding for some corporation so that you can represent their values. We're conditioned to surrender our sense of identity, our sense of individualism, our sense of curiosity and wonder, and trade it in for the doing whatever we're supposed to be doing mantra instead. And after years of that, we wind up buried in credit card debt and obligations, surrounded by people who don't share our values, so jaded that we forget that we ever even had values. And if we do remember them, they seem like a far-off, long-ago vision of something that we grew out of when we realized it doesn't exist. But it does. Adventure and true love, a sense of wonder and a sense of joy, these are not things that don't exist. They're just things that our adversaries don't want us to remember. Because they know if we remember those things, then we'll be unstoppable. When someone knows that they're free, you can't control them. And that's really what it all boils down to. We can be free. We can enjoy our lives. We can have high standards for what we embrace and what we include in our lives. And the naysayers will say, if you set your standards too high, you'll never find fulfillment. So you might as well give it up now and settle for what's available so that you don't wind up being even more disappointed when you wind up with nothing. But those same people will always be happy for you to exchange your pie-in-the-sky ideals for service to their interests. I think it's interesting how when talking to other people about priorities in life, obligations, I've found that if you tell people that you have something that you have to go do, they'll respect it. If you tell your boss that your wife expects you to be home, then he'll let you go home on time. If you tell your wife that the boss is going to fire you if you don't stay at the office and work late, then she'll be okay with you working long hours. But if you just said, I want to do something, purely for my own benefit, because that's what I choose to do, then suddenly people will look at you like you are a lazy, good-for-nothing, selfish, ignorant person. Because ultimately, a lot of people have more respect for your dog than they have for you. Because if you tell them that you have to go home so that you can feed your dog or let your dog out to go to the bathroom, they'll respect that. But if you said you wanted to leave work on time because you wanted to just enjoy your evening by yourself, well, then you're just lazy. See, people only seem to understand the language of obligation, of trouble, of problems, of negative things, and leverage. They try to manipulate other people. That's what they do. Not everyone, but many people. So, if you send the message that you are the property of someone else, then they'll respect that because they understand that principle of manipulating other people, and they wouldn't want to manipulate something that belongs to a different manipulator. But if you start to send the message that you are free, that you are your own agent, that you do things that bring joy into your life for your own satisfaction, and that that's reason enough for you to be free, that makes them uncomfortable. Because they don't want people to have a sense of romance and adventure and wonder. Because every person who has that is a threat to their own narrative. Every time someone else is happy, it's a reminder of what they gave up so that they could have the next best thing. And so we live in a world filled with lies, smoke and mirrors, and if you're not careful, you go down the rabbit hole. And you have time for your career, but not time for doing something you truly love. You have time for your family or your spouse, but you never find that actual sense of true love like the fairy tales would have told you you might seek and find. You have time for consuming hateful things about what's going on in politics or what's going on in the economy or what's going on the other side of town. Because we all do like to subscribe to bad news and clickbait and controversial topics. We all have time to have positions on things that won't make our lives better, to meddle in the affairs of other people, more than we have time to focus on our own priorities. We have time for all of those things. But really what we should make time for is a sense of wonder and a sense of adventure and a sense of positivity. And the belief that good things do exist in the world. And that all of those other distractions are just like the mobs you grind in an MMORPG. They're not really what the game is about. What the game is about is the sense of adventure. The sense of not knowing what might come next or who you might find around the next bend in the road. The mobs are just something for you to do along the way. The actual experience is deeper than that. I think it's important to go back to those roots, to remember that romance and adventure are not just fake things made up by people who are too idealistic to see the truth. They really do exist. And even if you don't find them, somebody will find them, and that's enough. Enough reason to be an advocate for them. But if you really do want to find those things, a good way to begin is to take time to make space in your life. I really love the story in the Bible about the 10 women who went to a bridegroom party, and they were waiting outside, and 5 of them brought lamps with extra oil, and the other 5 didn't bring any extra oil at all. And they all sat there waiting to get in. And then the foolish ones ran out of oil. Their lamps went out. They had to go back to the store to get more. And while they were gone, the doors opened and they were not there to go in. And so the wise ones went in when the door opened, and the foolish ones lost their opportunity. They weren't there. And that's kind of how it is when we fill our lives with noise and chaos and what everyone else wants us to do and be and think about and settle for. Then when those wonderful opportunities come along, when the doors open, we don't even know about it because we settled on believing that those things didn't exist, that those things weren't priorities. So we don't even know how close we might come to untold blessings in our lives because we spend our whole lives with our eyes cast downward. Too busy being busy to have space for good things to make their way into our lives. So begin to let some things go in your life. Find a sense of space and time, and allow yourself to be more open-minded to the spirit of adventure and the concept that life is filled with wonder and opportunities for amazement and for love. Don't settle for that narrative that just because you've grown up, you need to give up those ideas. Or that you can't be practical and also optimistic. That's really just a trap. It's a trap set by people who are miserable about their lives and want everyone else to be too. I always think it's interesting how if there's a tragedy, if there's a disaster, if something really bad happens, people get so excited about it and they love it. And the reason for that is because they know that their lives have been frustrating and terrible without direction. But they can't blame anyone other than themselves. And so they feel alone facing these adversaries. But when something bad happens, they love it because then they aren't alone anymore. When your house burns down, it's a tragedy for you. When every house in your neighborhood gets destroyed by a natural disaster, then everyone comes together because it's a common problem. So that one person who lost everything is going to really enjoy that, because now we're all in it together. And that's a big reason why people are so interested in getting other folks to have the same attitudes toward being slaves to the grind, settling for things, not having high standards in your life, all of it. Because they know that they have settled. They've settled for giving up on the idea of ever really finding the sense of love that they wanted to find in life. They've settled for a career they hate because they just got to pay the bills, keep up with the Joneses, whatever. They can't break that cycle. It's a curse they're stuck in. And so they move on to the next best thing, and that is getting other people to be slaves too. And you can look around in a world filled with people that are slaves to their own demons. It can seem like that's how everyone is. Until you step outside of that circle and you realize that's kind of an artificial state of being. It's possible to be happy, and it's possible to be free. And once you know that, it won't automatically take you to the place where you need to be. But I have found that there's a lot of power in knowing something is true. If you know that something's possible, you're less likely to give up before you reach the finish line. If you know it's possible, then you have cause for faith. Even if you don't know how it's possible, you have a lot different outlook on life that way versus just believing it's a lost cause right from the outset. The power of hope should not be underestimated. Perhaps that's why I like computer games, why I liked them as a child, and why I still like them today. Because they serve as a reminder of hope. A symbol of something that you can't quite put your finger on. That sense of adventure and romance. Ideas that many people would say are unimportant, but I would say are probably essential to quality of life, regardless of who you are, where you are, or where you find yourself in life. So do try not to ever lose those things. Till next time, thank you for watching.